Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. F1 cars back on track for the first time in months. The Australian Grand Prix weekend is finally underway and loads of key takeaways from practice here on the Friday. McLaren and Ferrari, they look like the strongest teams after the first couple of practice sessions. Red Bull not happy with where they are. Max Verstappen actually believes it might be somewhat hopeless for them this weekend. Mercedes in a very interesting position. Hamilton happy with his development in the car, but not quite where he needs to be yet. But the long run data is very telling indeed for what we might expect come Sunday. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. So much as ever to get into today. Early morning here in the UK to make this video. We've got plenty to discuss. First of all, Red Bull. Arvid Lindblad, we've talked about him for some time now, is clearly the guy they believe is their next Verstappen, as it were. They have struggled for years to find a good rookie talent pipeline into that Red Bull Formula 1 program. Lindblad, they think, is the man. To such an extent, they are trying to get an exemption for him to get a super license before he's 18. I don't think this is going to be granted. Mercedes, I think, tried this with Antonelli and it didn't happen. But Lindblad will be 18 at some point, and when he is, I think Red Bull are going to try and put him in a Formula 1 car as quickly as they possibly can. That's my take. Now, speaking of Red Bull's Formula 1 program, this has been causing quite a lot of a stir on social media in the last day or so, and that is Liam Lawson. Now, we know that Lawson made the comment to the media the other day when he got the drive at Red Bull. Only Daniel Ricciardo congratulated him, and we mentioned this, and it was like, well, it's kind of interesting that only Danny Rick would say anything because, plenty of other drivers on the grid. Now, we know that Lawson is not afraid to have a rivalry with another driver, right? He was causing a bit of drama last year in COTA with Alonso, right? I was going to say Austin, but, with Alonso. And he made the comment after the Grand Prix to say, look, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to win, stuff like that. So maybe the other drivers took note of that and said, okay, well, he's not here to make friends, then unlucky, you're not making any friends, and we're not going to congratulate you or say anything. And it's just interesting, you watch some of the body language. I know that people are going to say, body language experts and all this, but the way that Lawson and Verstappen are interacting here is like their interactions are so awkward. That's my read on it. Like when you watch Max with the driver that he likes, let's say Daniel Ricciardo or something, Max is having a great time, and okay, it's not like Max loves doing this media stuff, but Max generally does enjoy hanging out with his boys. And just watch the way that this plays out. Like Max does not want to be there, bro. Like I don't know what it is. It just doesn't seem like that relationship is great, and maybe it doesn't need to be great, and it probably doesn't matter, but it is a big talking point of F1 today, especially when you've got, okay, this was the first practice session, Max was P5, Lawson was P16, and, this comment goes, close enough, welcome back Checo, as obviously a bit of a joke really, right, about Checo's poor performance in practice and qualifying and everything last year, and Red Bull actually liked this, apparently, so I don't know if the Red Bull admin thought that they were on their personal account or something, but yeah, I don't know, it's an interesting start, let's say, to Lawson's tenure at Red Bull alongside Verstappen, but plenty to talk about. First of all, this is the upgrade list, although I think that these numbers are probably exacerbated to some degree, because I think they say what their car's parts are going to be for Bahrain for the test, and then when they turn up to Australia, the differences are noted. But actually, Red Bull, I think, used a lot of these parts already in the test in Bahrain anyway, so you can kind of discard a lot of these numbers on paper, really. Now, the first big notable moment was Behrman in the wall, and it was a really frustrating crash, I think, for Behrman and for Haas as well, because he goes wide at turn 10 to the really fast turn 9, turn 10 chicane, which is right up there with my favourite corner complexes on the entire calendar. I think it's truly spectacular, but it is possible to go wide. He did. He went wide into the gravel, and it looked like he was going to be able to save it, right? I think he felt like he'd probably saved it, but he just started to oversteer a little bit as he was coming off the gravel back onto the track. He overcorrected it and then had to re-overcorrect it, and then he was in the wall. It's a pretty big impact, really. Okay, he's okay. The car wasn't okay, and the car is, not going to be okay until tomorrow for the third practice session. Not the start that Behrman would have wanted, really, because of course he was so promising for the whole of last year every time he was in the car, but this is pretty inevitable. Rookies are going to crash, it is what it is, and hopefully, obviously he's okay, which is good. Hopefully it doesn't affect the rest of his weekend and has too much, you don't really want too much repair damage already for a season like this, but this is what people are saying about the fact that it's going to rain on Sunday, more than likely for the race. it is more than likely going to have rookies involved in a turn 1 incident. If it was to rain, Lance Stroll's still on the grid as well. So, who knows? These rookies are excellent. They've had loads of time in the car, but the fundamental thing is they are still rookies, and there is still an awful lot to learn. Now, we'll get to comments like this in a second, because Hamilton was frustrated with the lack of turning on the car. Of course, a lot of that's setup related, but as I said yesterday, Ferrari should be good here, in my opinion, and today they were good. Leclerc more so than Hamilton, but in the long runs, it paints a different picture to what we saw in terms of the pure performance, which, to be fair, is a pretty similar picture to what we saw last year. We'll get to that in a second, because it's certainly a talking point, but it's maybe not a massive surprise that in terms of like one-lap performance around a circuit where Hamilton's never driven a Ferrari, and a very different feeling car to what he's had when he's driven around here with a Mercedes, it's maybe understandable that he's not got the confidence to push it to the absolute limit like Leclerc has right now. And, of course, they changed things during the practice session and the car seemingly became much more compliant. But this was the result of the first practice session. Norris was P1 with a 1:17.2. We'll keep some of these lap times in mind as we get to the second practice session as well. Carlos Sainz, though, he had the standout lap of the session with a 1:17.4 basically. And he was ahead of Leclerc and, of course, ahead of Hamilton as well. And that was the big notable thing, right, is the fact that Sainz managed to outperform, at least for now, both of the Ferrari men. But yeah, the Williams was looking very good. I mean, look, it's practice at the end of the day. But I was quite impressed about how close a lot of the numbers here were, really. Like, if you look at Alonso, you look at Hadjar, even in P9, only about 6/10 off the fastest lap. Now, of course, it is notable that Verstappen was here in P5, Lawson was down in P16, of course. Behrman got really no representative laps in. And a new graphic here as well for the fastest lap time of the session. I kind of missed the old one where it was the boxes. You had Nicholas Latifi in the middle, you had a box 1, P2, P3, whatever. But yeah, I guess I'll get used to it. And it's not bad, is it really? The graphic here that they've dropped for Lando Norris going fastest for the first session. But in the second session, it was Leclerc, as it was last year. So let's not forget, last year it was Carlos Sainz who won this Grand Prix in the Ferrari. And for the last 2 years in a row, Leclerc has had, been fastest in FP2 and Norris has been fastest in FP1. So pretty interesting start to the season again. This was what it looked like in the Practice 2 session, and Leclerc this time was quickest with a substantially faster time than in the earlier session with a 1:16.4. And these cars, man, they are quick around Australia. Like, I love this track personally. Big fan of Albert Park, especially after they got rid of that chicane on the back curvy straight, and now it's just a pure straight. I think spectacular. And, it's going to be it's always entertaining in my opinion at Albert Park. But, some people don't like it. Okay, fair enough. Each of their own. But these cars are quick around this track. They look insanely fast. And it's been great to watch. So, Leclerc, Piastri, Norris, P1, P2, P3. Usual suspects, really. Tsunoda was P4 in the RB, Hadjar was P6, Hamilton was P5 in the mix, Verstappen P7, Hulkenberg was up here at P8. Like, it was an absolute mess. And of course, notably, Lawson was nowhere. And equally notably, the Mercedes was kind of nowhere as well. Stroll was here and Alonso was further behind. So it was a difficult session to get too much of a read on. But in terms of long-run performance, probably more relevant, as we'll get to in a second. So George Russell was P10 here with a, 0.8 off where Leclerc was on his fastest lap. Now, this is interesting when you look at Russell talking about the soft tyres, because last weekend's, most of the running was done on the C3 tyre, right? So most of the teams put in all of their laps on what is effectively the medium. Now, it depends on the weekends what compound actually is what compound. I think Australia certainly has the softer compounds when compared to let's say, Bahrain, what they're going to be using there. But the C3 tyre was a good tyre for many teams. But all of a sudden, not many teams in testing in Bahrain were really using the particularly softer compounds. All of a sudden here now, they're pulling them out in Australia, and it is causing some issues for some teams. So again, Mercedes, their car looks fast when they can get it right. But confusingly, they can't seem to really work it with all the tyres, because when they put the soft tyre on, they were basically as fast as they were with the hard, which was very confusing to Russell and Antonelli. I mean, Russell was talking about it afterwards and saying that I'm basically as fast on the hard, if not faster than on the soft tyre, which is very confusing. It's all about getting the tyres warmed up and the right window and all this type of stuff. But, it's something that hopefully Mercedes, for their sake, can figure out. The point being that Russell knows that there is a lot of pace in the car, but again, they're not necessarily always able to extract it. And that's the thing, especially around Albert Park, if you qualify poorly, even if your race pace is good luck making substantial progress through the field. Now, Piastri says that it was a pretty encouraging practice day. The pace was solid. There's some things to iron out in the car. We'll have a look at some of these numbers in a second. Hamilton, of course, didn't have a spectacular day. FP1 wasn't great. FP2 was certainly better. And his long-run data is very good, and we'll see in a second. But the one-lap pace, it was about 4/10 off Leclerc. But as he says, it's just so, so different to him feeling this car than it has been previously. But the main takeaway from Hamilton is that he's not, frustrated. I think he's actually very excited and happy with how the car behaves and responds most of the time. He just recognises that he's got an awful lot to learn and figure out. And of course, if, you're not got 100% confidence, then best not to crash it in practice when not given the opportunity. So this is what Red Bull say, and the takeaways get very interesting now, especially when we look at some of the long-run data. Now, Marco says the McLarens are faster, Ferrari is also fast, especially Leclerc. Behind them, it will be exciting between us and Mercedes. So kind of already, Red Bull are in this position of saying, yeah, we're probably the third fastest car, maximum right now, which is not where Red Bull would have liked to have been. And I think these statements from Max were especially concerning for Red Bull fans, is because apparently the balance of the car was actually okay today. It's not like the balance was shocking and therefore they couldn't turn the car. In fact, Verstappen says that the balance was actually all right, which is good, great, they found the right balance. But they found the right balance and the car's still slow, which is, it's good and bad, isn't it? Because it means that solving the speed of the car problem, which seems to be a problem, is not an easy fix because they've got the balance basically right. So what do they do? And especially because Lawson was just nowhere, absolutely nowhere. In pace in qualifying runs, he was nowhere. And in pace in long runs, he was still nowhere. There really isn't anything else to say. And that's why Max says the balance wasn't really wrong, but somehow we just didn't get any grip and it was difficult. That's why we're not really at the top now. These are not really big balance problems. So it's going to be difficult to solve. It's not that I didn't expect this. I'm not positively or negatively surprised by our speeds. We haven't performed well here in Australia since the new asphalt was laid. That doesn't help us, but it's the same for everyone. We've got to find more speed. So Max says that he's, disappointed but not surprised, basically. Now, these are some of the long run numbers. So Gasly did a soft tyre run. On the medium tyre runs, which basically everybody did, these are what we found, and the hard tyres look like this, but not only really Mercedes who were using them, but still the numbers for Mercedes were very impressive, right? Because look at this, the hard tyre run of Russell and Antonelli were very similar to the top times on the mediums here for Norris and Hamilton. But we'll look at some more in-depth numbers in a second, but this is the overall picture, that Norris was averaging a 1:21.9, then it was Hamilton at a 1:22.1, Piastri basically the same pace, Leclerc very similar, Verstappen of course in the mix as ever. Sainz wasn't far off either in his, when you see Sainz I think Ferrari, but of course that's now a Williams, and this is what some of the other times look like, so definitely notable stuff. Now these of course different ways you analyze it, different outliers you take, you're going to get slightly different numbers. But the point is that Lando and Oscar's run looks something like this. Lando used DRS on his final run as well, so that may give him just a slight smidgen edge over what some of the other guys were doing as well. But 1:21.9 is kind of where Lando was. Now this is what Brake Boosted put together, and again you see the 1:21.9 here for Norris, 1:22.1 roughly for Piastri, and Leclerc and Hamilton, the lap times depends. I think Leclerc's, maybe if you were considering the run to be slightly shorter, he was on a 22.1. Notably, he had a lap in there which was a 1:20.8, which was the fastest in the long run of anyone, and Hamilton had a lap in there 1:21.2. Now, apparently both of those runs were done on the higher engine mode. So Ferrari were using a very conservative engine mode for the majority of this run, and then they turned it up. They turned up the heat for one lap, and we saw how much difference that makes. So I think that's when you can see the importance of the engine mode basically. But still, Norris had the fastest overall stint. Verstappen's stint was good, but obviously relatively short. Russell and Antonelli was very impressive, but on the hard tyre, so it's kind of difficult to compare. Lawson, though, was absolutely nowhere. Now, look, I wasn't watching Lawson's onboard, so I wouldn't be able to tell you about traffic conditions and whatever, but his lap times were all over the shop and just very slow, which is concerning, right? I mean, Has anything changed? Okay, it's literally the first day of the season. But you know what I'm saying, right? Like, the idea of Max being in the mix with the top guys and his teammate being nowhere, it doesn't really seem like that's massively changed yet, and maybe you wouldn't expect it to, but just one thing to keep your eyes on. So brake boosted removed the laps where Leclerc was using DRS and overtaking Verstappen, and the laps where it affected both of those guys, he then got rid of. And, Ferrari apparently did their race runs in engine mode 4, which is substantially slower than the engine mode 1 that they used on the fastest lap times that they did. And, also interesting to note that both Ferrari drivers' tyres are apparently 3 laps older than the McLaren's when they went out. So is 3 laps older enough to justify this kind of pace difference? Possibly, yes. So it is very much an argument that it's very competitive between all of these guys right now, certainly at the front of the field. And you can never fully count Max out either. But this is what De Kessa says in the analysis in the Auto Racer guys, that Leclerc's very close already to the pole time from last year, and it looks like the SF25 suited to his style. The McLaren is very balanced. The Red Bull's not in the right spot, but was faster but poor in traction. We'll see that in a second. Mercedes better on the higher fuel. So it's kind of all to play for. This is as well interesting. Turns 9 and 10, the higher speed corners, the Red Bull continues to be very impressive here, right? It's the fastest car in those couple of corners. The McLaren's right there. Even the Sauber was there, which is kind of surprising. So, this list isn't fully representative of who the actual fastest cars are. But the Sauber was quick in turn 9 and turn 10. The Red Bull was quick there too. But in the slower corners, don't know why I said it like that, the Red Bull was really nowhere, right? So, okay, Ferrari had a bigger wing on, so maybe understandable that they're going to have some slightly better slow speed performance in the corners, but still, the Red Bull nowhere in the slow speed corners and the traction zones is going to be a serious issue for them. Now, there was some talk about this as well. This is some of the telemetry data that shows at turn 3, Lando is, let's just say coasting a little bit into the corner compared to Leclerc. So this is interesting. His fastest run, Lando, that 1:16.5, he actually lifted off far earlier. Now, I don't think this was necessarily a lift off to, let's say gain speed on the exit. It actually just seems like, look, he lifts off and his delta drops to about 0.3 of a second. So that specific corner, it seems like Lando was almost hiding a bit of pace. That's one of the concerning things, maybe, is that if Lando, if this orange line here goes up to where the red line is and Lando breaks at the same point that Leclerc did, likely Lando would be 10th and a half up on Charles, maybe more. So, yeah, interesting to see what actually happens come tomorrow. But this is the takeaway from Auto Racer. Vasseur says Ferrari are happy. They're in a good spot. Norris says that they're still not great on the low fuel, although I'm not sure the numbers necessarily support that. I think, again, McLaren are playing themselves down. Piastri's looking at the Ferrari being good. Hamilton said he's very excited. The car is totally different, but he's building things up. Antonelli says that, the long run was better. But Verstappen goes, we are missing something, and I am not surprised. That is the takeaway for the day. It's going to be hot in qualifying tomorrow, and Sunday, of course, it's likely going to rain. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to be in Dallas, and time zone-wise, that means that everything's going to be happening really late night. So, anyway, I'll try and make it work. I'm going to be tired, I think, but I'm excited to have Formula 1 back anyway. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.